Hey there, Nick Genetakis here. In this video, we're going to go over an open source tool that I just created called Wait Until. Now, the primary use case for this script is, let's say that you have a web application running inside of Docker, and this application happens to use a database, such as Postgres or MySQL, but really it could be any database, and honestly, the script will work for any command, but this is just the primary use case of why I created the script. But anyways, yeah, let's say that you have this application, right? The first thing you would typically do to start this application is you would do a Docker compose up. Like, let's just say that we built the project already, right? And you can see after I run Docker compose up here, it's gonna do some things. And once these containers start to get created, notice how the Postgres container, the light blue one over here, is doing all sorts of different work here. That's because this is the first time I started the project, so there was no database created. So Postgres had to go in there and create a database based off of certain environment variables that I have in a .env file. But this process to create the database initially with Postgres, it takes like 4, 5, 6 seconds, something like that. And maybe on a lower spec CI machine, it may take something like 8 or 9, possibly even 10 seconds to happen. Now, I'm going to go back to my code editor here, and I'm going to open up a fake CI file here. Just to give you an example, for example, if you're using GitHub Actions or GitLab CI or Jenkins or any other, CI service, it doesn't really matter. It's going to work the same in all of them. But like, imagine in your CI file, you have a specific workflow of doing like, run the project, doing a Docker compose up. Then let's ignore this stuff for now, right? This is new stuff that we're going to go over. And, part of your CI pipeline might be to do something like, reset your database. Possibly that involves creating like a test DB. It really depends on what web framework you're using. And then you might do something like run a linter, in this case, Flake 8 for Python, but it could be any linter. And then maybe you have your test suite, right? Maybe you have 10 tests, 100 tests, whatever. But these tests probably need to access your database. And here lies the problem. You can't really reset your database until Postgres creates that database. Likewise with MySQL, you're going to run into the same problem, and it's probably going to maybe be an issue with MongoDB as well. But that is the basic problem. So I'm going to save this file, and I'm just going to close this out here, right? I don't need to have this running. And then I'm going to run that fake script over here. So what did I name it? Fake CI? Yeah. So here it goes. Now it does a Docker compose down to make sure we're on a fresh start here. Now it's going to up everything in the background. And now it's going to try to reset the database. Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs. It failed because look at this. Postgres is not running. Man, and the whole entire thing stalled out. And that's probably what's going to happen to you in a real CI environment. So to get around that, I created this wait until script. And what this one does is basically it's a binary, right? It's a very, very, very small bash script that you can either like copy paste into your base CI image, or you can download it from GitHub because I do have a repo for that, and we'll go over that in a second. But the idea is all you have to do is pass in the command that you just want to wait until this thing actually works. Now, in this case, I'm working with Docker Compose, and I've already done a Docker Compose up here. So I'm going to wait until, I can exec into that container, into the Postgres container, because if I go back over here, I'll just open up Vim here again, and I'll just show you my Docker Compose YAML file very quickly here. I have this Postgres service. That's basically what that is. So I'm going to exec into that Postgres service using Docker Compose. I'm going to pass in some environment variable to the container here, because this is how the psql command will read in your password. This Postgres_password environment variable is being sourced in from a .env file. We'll go over that in a second as well. But the general idea here is, yep, I'm going to exec into the Postgres container, run psql as this specific user. And what am I going to do? I'm just going to do a very simple query here, which is a select one, that basically ensures that our database is really ready to go. That means our database is connected. We're actually connecting to it with this environment variable. So if the Postgres database, or I think it's Postgres_DB possibly, if that environment variable isn't set, it just falls back to using your Postgres user. So this database is created, I'm able to log into it as this user, and I'm able to select the DB. That means that the database must be ready to go. So then we can actually go ahead and run our test suite. So let me just go ahead and jump back over to this other terminal here, and I'll just rerun that one command that failed a second ago, which is the fake CI one. But now it should work because the wait until script is going to take action and it's going to wait a couple of seconds until the DB is ready, hopefully. Never know, doing live demos on videos. Let's see, here we go. So PSQL, it failed to connect, failed to connect, failed to connect. Oh, there we go, it worked. And now the script is going to continue onwards. It's going to run my linter, and now the third one that pops up is going to be the test suite here for the Build a SaaS Apple Flask course that I have. And this, has something like 101 tests, I think. And I hope all of them pass on video, but I'm pretty confident they are. So come on, don't prove me wrong here. Go, go, go. This only takes about 10 seconds or so to run these 100 tests that, lots of database access and things like that. There we go, 104 passing tests. So you can imagine, this CI file here, if this is actually running in a CI environment, this would work totally cool. Now, if you're using something like MySQL, then, this is like your CI script here, right? You can very easily change this to use MySQL instead of PSQL. And in a second, we're going to take a look at the README file for this script that explains how you can install this and, modify this command that you can basically just copy paste from MySQL. But let's go back to this env file really quick here. So inside of this repo, I do have a .env file, which I don't want to open up on video because it does have private things like my Stripe API keys and email credentials. But I do have this env example file here that basically shows you how these environment variables got into the picture. So here's like the Postgres user one, right? We create this snake eyes username here with a password of password. So that's how that gets in there. If you were connecting to something like a remote database, like for example, in my real CI environment, what I do is I basically just move this .env, that example file, to be a .env file because the actual .env file is emit from version control. But yeah, since I'm not really dealing with sensitive passwords in that .env example file, it has like a silly password of password for development to get going. That works fine. But maybe sometimes you might want to connect to a remote database. Like maybe you just have, I don't know, like a test database in RDS or something like that. So you can pop in like the host flag and connect to that. And then instead of just sourcing the env file for these environment variables, you can just send them in using whatever, CI service that you use. All of those services typically have a way for you to insert secure environment variables in like, the web front end of how you would manage that. And then it just gets inserted into the script. And yeah, you are totally good to go. So now that's basically how it works, why it's been developed. And now let's maybe just go over the README file a bit on GitHub because I literally just pushed this like an hour ago. So there's not going to be any stars right now, considering I haven't even announced this yet. But you can see here, it's a zero dependency bash script that waits until a command of your choosing has run successfully. And I'm not going to narrate this entire README file because, I did write this whole entire thing out here. And you can for sure read that on your own time if you'd like. But I just want to go over some high-level details of the script right here. So it is zero dependency. I mean, it is a very, very simple bash script that basically just loops on this command here that we pass in as the first argument. And it's going to continuously loop until basically it responds with an exit 0. So it's successful. So in between each loop, we're going to sleep for 1 second, iterate this I value here. That's going to go from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 every second because we're sleeping for a second. And if we hit the timeout value, which defaults to 30 seconds, then we're just going to give up and just say that, hey, you know what? This command just doesn't work. It timed out because we have a timeout of X seconds. So that does mean you can customize the timeout very easily. You just pass in a second parameter to the script, and we'll go over that in a second. I know eval technically is really bad to use, but honestly, I'm not really sure how else to solve this problem. You can't just put something like exec and then like $@ symbol here instead of command or whatever. That just doesn't work. It's almost like every iteration of the script doesn't happen. If you know a better way of doing this without eval, then feel free to open up a pull request. So now going back to the README file here, you might be thinking, wait, isn't there already scripts and things to do this already? Like, why not just sleep for, 10 seconds or something in your CI script? And like, for sure, you can totally do that. And that's what I did initially for quite some time. But the problem with that is it's very brittle, right? It's like, if you sleep for 10 seconds, but Postgres only takes like 4 seconds to be initialized, then you're wasting 6 seconds of your CI run every single time. And a lot of these CI providers, they usually typically have like build time in minutes as part of their plans. So you don't want to have extra time. Also, you're a human being, like unless things drastically change in the future, probably going to die at some point, right? Like why waste, waiting 20 extra seconds to be safe? Like if you decided to wait for 30 seconds or something like that. But then there's this famous like wait for it script, right? It's got like thousands of stars in GitHub, and general purpose, very small bash script that basically waits for the availability of a TCP host and port. You'll see this commonly if you've searched around for like, how do I wait for my database in Docker or something like that? But this script, honestly, totally kind of a different use case. Like it's not quite suitable for like a CI environment. And yeah, I mean, for starters, like, sure, it waits for a TCP port to be available, but that port might be available before your database is actually capable of being connected to. So the Postgres service might actually be up and running, and it exposes a port 5432, and you can technically, access that port, but the database and the user credentials to get in there don't work. So now suddenly it's like you have CI runs that are failing because it's like technically available based on the wait for it script, but it's not really ready. But then it's like also, yeah, there's a problem with that in that you need to basically expose a port that you can connect to, which means that you have to install wait for it in your actual apps Docker image. And if you're using wait for it as like a more robust version of depends on, then you're going to have that for sure. But if this is like a CI environment only thing and you're not really using wait for it for like a more robust depends on, then yeah, I mean, I don't want to install a script into like my production image just for the sake of like CI. And then it's like, well, if you install the wait for it script outside the image, then your database itself is going to need to publish its port back to the Docker host, right? Like a -p 5432:5432. And now suddenly, like, you definitely don't want to have that in your real compose file, right? Because that means the public internet is going to be able to attempt to log into your database. So then you go like down these rabbit holes, right? Where you, I don't know, rig up some type of like sed inline replacement that you just run in your CI script to only publish the port for CI, but not production. And it's like, what are you getting yourself into? Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I have nothing against the script. Clearly very popular, clearly a very good script, but I just don't see it as a solution for dealing with the CI problem. And like, to make depends on more robust, like, I really do think that this is a problem that you should solve at the application level. Like, your web framework should be able to be smart enough to like retry your database connection until it works. And basically, that's going to kick in after you've ensured that the user and the database exist. And that's basically what wait until will allow you to do. Basically meaning like you kind of don't really need the wait for it script in any use case, in my opinion. But of course, your mileage may vary. In any case, it just didn't work for me. So that's why I wrote this one. So installing this, very super simple. Typically you wouldn't really install this on your dev box. Like, I mean, sure, if you have some use cases that's not related to like waiting for Docker container databases, you can just, pop it over to somewhere in your system path and run it and then use it, and then you're good to go. But typically what you might do is, at least in a lot of CI environments, they allow you to create your own base Docker image, and then all of your tests run within that base CI image that you've created. So typically what you might want to do is just add this script as part of your base CI image, and then within your CI environment, you can just run wait until. This is actually one of the few times where using add instead of copy comes in handy, because copy is really good for doing things like copying things from the local working directory into some path in your image, but add lets us actually just go ahead and pop in a URL here, and it's going to copy this over this wait until binary over to use a local bin, and then we'll make it executable. So really, you just need to drop this somewhere near the bottom of your Docker file. And then also just be aware that right now the README file points to this release. As I release new versions, I will be updating the README file, but if you wanted to use something like master, there is a note here in the README that says, you can just replace the tag name with master, but I wouldn't recommend doing that because master may change in the future. So it's not something that's going to be like an immutable tag. You don't want to have that change under your feet. So I recommend using a specific version. So also, I don't know, if you're super hypersensitive about your base CI image's size, you can always just not add these instructions to your Docker file and literally just copy paste it from this Git repo and drop it into your own local file system. And then you can do something like, copy use local bin to use a local bin, like assuming you have other couple scripts that are part of your base CI image. This could just shrink your image very, very slightly by not adding these two new layers. So that's a possibility. There's like a one-liner curl script that you can do to basically just download this latest release to the current directory, and then you can put it anywhere you want. So yeah, usage examples. We kind of went over like the env file. Be careful about connecting to a remote database. Definitely don't want to put those in version control. But like, here's the command for waiting for PostgreSQL, right? or for Postgres. I don't know why I said PostgreSQL. That's kind of weird. I feel like that's the second time I've said that on video in the past 6 months. But anyways, if you're using Postgres, you can pretty much just copy these two commands here, source it in, and then run the command. This does expect that you have your Postgres service named Postgres. If it's a different name, then all you have to do is change that. And when it comes to things like the password and user, like the official Postgres image already expects you to be setting these as environment variables anyways, so you don't even need to change that. And if you want to do like something like a more robust query or whatever, then select one. Like maybe you want to make sure some tables that you've created are existing or something like that as like a different type of a test as part of your CI pipeline. You can always just modify this command to run that instead. Now, and it says here to do, right? Like this is where you would run the rest of your test suite, like your linter and your test suite and anything else that you need to do. Then for MySQL, it's the exact same story. The only difference here is we're execing into a MySQL container, right? MySQL service over here. We're going to run the MySQL command line tool instead of pSQL. We pass in the database name and it's the same query, just different flags. And also for MySQL, this is how you can get a password in here securely. And yeah, that's basically it. I mean, if you're running MongoDB or some other database that has this behavior, which I'm sure you'll know if you use that database, then you can just swap in this command with anything you want. So there are a couple of things here that's kind of worth going over, such as like what's up with the -t flag. And this is actually something I ran into, a bug potentially, when I had things set up a slightly different way, which we'll go over based on like this answer. But anyways, with a capital -T, if you run this in development, like on your dev box, you're connecting to a terminal with some type of terminal emulator, and like life is good, you get all sorts of good stuff, like being able to have interactive prompts, and you can see colors because Docker Compose exec automatically like it configures a TTY for you. But when you're on like a CI environment, you're not going to have those benefits. So you actually need to disable TTY allocation by doing this flag here, -T. Otherwise, you'll get this exact error here, like, and this actually happened to me quite some time ago, and that's why the -T is there. So then also there's this other thing here too, right? It's like, well, if we go back to my terminal, where was that terminal output? The one where it just failed for a bit. Yeah, you start seeing, items like this in your CI logs, and your CI server is probably going to be a little bit slower, so you might see different errors like popping up 3 or 4 times before it eventually works. And honestly, if I'm working in a CI environment, I kind of want to see that. Like that's not a bad idea to see those log entries. But, if you want to keep it super clean, it's super easy, right? You're in full control over this command. So you can just redirect everything to dev null, right? And there's an example here where you can just add this to the very end of the command, like right outside that last quote here, you would just paste this in. And then, well, if I can select, you just paste this in after the last quote there, and you're good to go. But as mentioned here, I like seeing the output in CI. It's especially handy for when you want to debug this actual command itself that you're waiting on, because if you redirect, standard out, standard error to dev null, then it's literally not going to output anything. So there's no way you would even see something like this input device error from happening. So that's why I just don't have this being redirected by default in the script itself, because I totally, easily could have just gone here into the script and just made that redirect happen over here. But in earlier iterations of the script, like when I was working on this for a while before I published it to be open source, I ran into problems like that. So I think it's very important that you, the user, have full control over whether or not you want to see the output for things like that. Also, you can see here too, there's one configuration option where you can configure the timeout. So typically, the database would be initialized in, 4 to 9 seconds or whatever. But if you're on a really, really slow box, or you're using this for a different use case than waiting for a database to be ready, it defaults to 30 seconds, but you can just pass in as a second argument to the script some type of number, and like that's going to be the number of seconds that it'll wait for in a timeout. So if you actually install this tool locally on your machine, you can just run something like the grep command with no arguments, which is going to fail because at minimum grep requires at least 1 argument. So it's going to try to run grep, and then give up. And then yeah, that's basically how it works. So I hope you like this video. I think this is sort of an interesting tool. It's going to be a part of all of my future CI setups. I've been using this in some client work recently with really good success. So if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, please leave them below in the comment. If you take a look at this script and you happen to see that maybe I did something silly, or a better way of doing it, like maybe not with eval, feel free to open up a pull request. Also, this repo itself is using GitHub Actions. So if you kind of want to see like a super basic workflow on how to set that up, I'm not a super pro with GitHub Actions yet, but I've been using it a little bit. Pretty nifty. It's always here to take a look at if you'd like. And on that note, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.